All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for joining us for the program Using Irrigation Wisely. And today we are doing this with Boone Holladay. And Boone Holladay is a county extension agent from Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. He holds an undergraduate degree in horticulture from Stephen F. Austin State University and a master's. Sorry, excuse me. Okay, and that's interesting. Okay, he holds an undergrad degree in horticulture in Stephen F. Austin State University and a master's degree in agriculture excellence. Oh, excuse me, agriculture education from Texas A&M University. Long before attaining these degree titles, he was an avid gardener and young plant enthusiast. He brings previous experience as horticulture staff at Moody Gardens in Galveston, Producers Cooperative in Bryan, and Texas A&M Horticulture in College Station. Having work experience in many horticulture areas and industry, from retail horticulture to landscape design and irrigation installation, he brings that knowledge paired with enthusiasm into Fort Bend County programming efforts. And now I turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Christina. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here today. It seems a little untimely for us to be discussing irrigation when we're getting showers. Seems like every day of the week recently. So I could do the short version of the presentation would be to turn your irrigation systems to the off setting, and then we would be done here. That would be the short of it right now, but I do have a good full presentation here. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and also I have a little show and tell here in the office of some items that we'll be discussing. So bear with me if I end up tripping over my headphone wire in the process. At least maybe we'll get a good laugh out of it. We will have Miss Sumu Mudan, and I think Nancy Chev is on here as well from Fort Bend Master Gardeners. They'll be wrangling questions in the chat area. So if you have questions during the presentation, I would prefer to entertain those during the presentation while they're timely. So if you have certain questions or comments, just drop those in the chat box, and then Suma will direct those over to me. And I keep seeing Jim's steps showing up on there. Jim, it's really nice seeing you. It's always a pleasure seeing you. But make sure you keep your mic turned off, muted, and if you wouldn't mind, keep your camera feed. For some reason, you keep turning that back on after Christina is turning it off. All right, so here we go. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Okay. So all of these programs for landscape success are all kind of wrapped around all the guiding principles within the Earth-Kind landscape system. And this was a system of kind of theoretical guidelines and principles for home landscaping that, ensures a good, healthy landscape, but is keeping our environment in mind, local ecology and ecosystems, and limiting unnecessary use of water, potable water in the landscapes, addressing unnecessary fertilizers and pesticides in the landscape, minimizing lawn and landscape waste from the garden. All these things are important on a high level issue, and so what Texas A&M, what it does through this Earth-Kind program addresses those issues with some real world research backed principles and guidelines on landscaping. So these are James is content with letting us hear him cook food in the microwave.
I just muted him again.
Oh, Jimbo. So these are all the guiding principles of the Earth Kind Landscape Program, and we're through each of these landscape success classes, we'll be addressing each one of these one by one. And so today we are going to be looking right here at this efficient irrigation component. Will be our main focus on how we can irrigate our plants effectively without wasting water. Basically, to put it in a nutshell. Okay, so how do we do that? By these learning objectives today. One, why is it important and critical that we conserve water in an area of the state of Texas that tends to get 46 to 48 inches of rainfall per year, and at some points during the spring gets up to 30 inches in some areas, or Hurricane Harvey of getting 50 inches within a week. So why is it important for us to conserve water? Is that it's not just water, that the water we use on our landscapes has been treated through municipalities as a potable, drinkable water source. It's gone through a lot of processes to get it to a cleanliness that we can drink it. Okay, so that's designed to go in the house to be used for us to consume ourselves, to drink, to wash our dishes with, to wash our food with, to bathe with, not necessarily to just turn around and put it right back out into the landscape. And so that process costs a lot of money and resources to do. So we really don't need to be using that much. So it's trying to conserve as much as possible by utilizing these best landscape management practices, a whole kind of tool book of strategies to help minimize water needs. The next one is how to audit, maintain, and repair an existing irrigation system, how to program your system on your controller for maximum efficiencies, and how to modify your system for even greater conservation and savings with some new technologies and little cool devices that we'll talk about, and then building confidence in how you can regularly maintain your own system at home without being worried about it. Okay. So, the concept here is pretty simple, and the work that we do, it's very clear as we go across the county that the vast majority of people are applying way too much water into their landscapes. And not only are we wasting water, we see water going down the sidewalks, driveways, and down into the gutter, potable drinking water. In a lot of these situations, we end up with root rot issues from oversaturated soils. So plants are actually drowning in water. Or we are encouraging disease pressure on plants through fungal and bacterial diseases on the leaves, stems. It impacts the flowering ability of plants. And in some cases, if we create this kind of constant wet, humid environment, we also are inviting pests, insect pests, to mature and to overpopulate and damage our plants. And this is all because we've put too much water in the landscape, and too much is not good in this situation. So we're going to ask you to cut back, but do it wisely. Don't just cut back to where the plants are injured because of it, but cut back to the point where we're trying to match up the moisture needs of our plants with our applied irrigation. Doing more with less. So just a couple quick facts here is we've got about 89% of single family homes having irrigation systems. And in Fort Bend County, with a huge wave of development of suburban development, new large housing blocks coming in. Seems like every week. Most of these new builds are coming with an irrigation system installed. It's just part of the package that you get. When we get into some of the older communities, some of the farm communities, this presentation is probably not going to be as relevant to you, unfortunately, because we're talking about the installed irrigation system that includes all the modern components. This is kind of the monster that we're trying to address is how we tame this beast. Um, and so we're looking at a whole lot of people that have these irrigation systems, have them functioning kind of on autopilot, and we have about 85% of those individuals who really don't understand how it works. They know it's coming on, they know how many days a week it's coming on, but they don't know how much water it's applying, and they don't understand where they can increase efficiencies if there's damages in the system that need to be addressed, etc. So I'm going to go through those kind of one by one to give you an idea of what you need to be looking for. Suma, do we have any questions so far?
Not yet, Boone.
All right. Okay. So just some of the things that we discovered when we're talking with homeowners is we don't know how long to water. So this is your run time per station. We don't know how often to run our programs. I talk to a lot of people on the phone and they have disease pressure in their turf grass. And as I ask them, how many days a week their irrigation is going, a lot of times it's every day is their response. And that is not only way too much water, but it is probably the culprit of the disease problems that they're dealing with. They don't understand plant watering requirements, is that some plants are mesic, some are hydric, and some are xeric. And these are plants that either don't need much water at all or need a lot of water. Consider precipitation in this equation, is that we're not just applying an inch a week of irrigation. We need to keep track of how much rainfall we've had to make us aware of a decision if we need to cut back on it or just turn the system off. Right now, the answer is probably just turn the system off. How to set your irrigation controller and how to change the settings as needed. Go in there and kind of reschedule your program times. It's kind of daunting at first for people who haven't done it. But if you follow through your instruction guide or utilize tutorials, videos that you can find online, you'll find that it's actually very easy to do. And just general maintenance of the system. Make sure everything is working properly.
Boone, there is a question from Prem. He's asking, how do you locate the irrigation system valve for a specific chain?
Let me see the question. I don't understand the question.
Yeah, how do you locate the irrigation system valve for a specific chain? I think he's meaning like each valve takes care of one zone, right? One or two zones, whatever. So is that his question?
Yeah, I don't understand the use of the word wall. Just
Valve.
valve. I'm sorry, valve. Okay. Very good, very good. And I'll get to that once we start kind of looking at the bits and pieces of the system. Valves, yes, indeed. Yeah, that'll be coming up here in a little bit. So I'll promise I'll address it.
After 30 years living in this country, I still have a strong accent. What can I do?
Well, we all just meet in the middle is what we do. All right, so here we have best management practices. I'm going to go ahead and highlight all these so I don't have to mess with all this. Okay. All right. So water only when water is required it's best to water after 6 p.m. in the summertime and before 10 a.m. Put my little box down here. Water in the morning is the best option. Early, I would suggest, right at or before sunrise. And this is to minimize disease pressure, because the longer we have the grass, leaves, and the leaves of your shrubbery and annuals and perennials wet, if they're wet for more than 6 hours, we're starting to cause disease pressure. So that is the main reason why we would want to water primarily early in the morning, because as the sun comes up, the moisture evaporates off the foliage and we are avoiding disease pressure. Also, we're getting the most efficiency out of the water that we apply if we do it this way, particularly if we water in the afternoon, 6 to 7 p.m. That allows us to get the water there. It lets the moisture dry off of the foliage before sunset, so the leaves are dry at night, and we are maximizing on the use of that water versus watering during the daytime, during the middle of the day, the hot period of the day. Only judge your water requirements in the morning, because especially this time of year, as it gets the sunnier and hot and windy, your plants are going to show some drought stress midday to early afternoon. And that is simply because the plants can't keep up with the moisture loss through transpiration. Plants breathe, and as they breathe, they either take in or they lose moisture. And so basically, at that period of midday, they're really kind of running low on water, but that doesn't mean that there's not enough moisture in the soil. It just means that the plant's having a hard time absorbing enough from the root system quick enough to offset some wilting effect on the plants. So in the morning is the best time to make that judgment if your plants are droughty. Water deeply to promote deep, healthy roots. So we say deep and infrequent. Deep and infrequent. So we're trying to put down a pretty good amount of water and allow that to go down into the subsoil. And then we want that to dry out in between waters, because plants need moisture, but they also need oxygen in the root system. And so if we don't have air down into the root zone, then the plants are going to suffocate. 1 inch of water generally will penetrate the soil to a depth of 6 inches. Now, there's variations to this because of soil type. This is assuming we have a pretty good soil where moisture can go down quickly. What we know in Fort Bend County, a lot of us have this heavy black clay, and that might not be the case. So there's this strategy called cycle and soak, where we use a little strategy of applying a little bit of water on all the stations, coming back and doing several cycles right after each other to allow that 1 inch of water to go down into the soil instead of washing off of the surface. We're going to try to water slowly for better moisture absorption. So in some cases, we might want to use drip irrigation, soaker hoses, or micro drippers wherever possible. We're going to try not to water on windy days for several reasons. Is one, you've probably seen somebody's sprinkler system watering the neighbor's yard instead of yours. And also during hot, sunny, windy days, we have a lot of evaporation of moisture, so you tend to be wasting a lot of water. And the last one here is just to check your irrigation system monthly for any issues that you might have. We have some questions in there, Suma?
Yeah. What is the clear symptom that we are overwatering?
Mm-hmm. Some of those symptoms, if we're looking at turf grass, for instance, is going to be yellowing on the foliage, splotchy yellowing in areas, especially if there's low spots in the yard. that might hold water longer, it's going to be unhealthy yellowish looking growth. In flower beds with shrubs, annuals and perennials, you're going to have plants that look leggy, tall and leggy, and maybe be bare lower down towards the ground, where they should be nice dark green and bushy. We might have some bare areas down towards the lower sections of the plant that show yellow, brown, or even dead leaves, because of too much moisture. Another test that you can do is to go out and take a post hole digger in the flower bed or on the edge of the lawn, and just dig a core hole. 12 inches is probably good enough just to test. Hold on a second. Sorry about that. I was just going to keep on going. If I didn't reach over there and do it. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So by digging a hole down about a foot deep, you can reach down in there and just feel the soil. Um, if it's waterlogged and there's moisture kind of falling down into that hole, we know we have way too much water. But generally, our rule of thumb for summertime is about an inch of water per week on a typical landscape. In midsummer, during the active growing season of St. Augustine turfgrass, we might argue that 2 inches may be appropriate to keep that growth steady through the summertime, but somewhere between 1 to 2 inches during the growing season. So when I say that, that tends to be from about April 1st or April 15th until maybe the latter part of October. And then your moisture needs are really declining in the off season. So from mid-October all the way over till April, we generally just recommend people turn your irrigation systems to the off position. There's really no reason to be watering during those months. You want to do another question, Suma?
Yeah, I'm reading the questions. My shrubs and plants need water more often in the summer than the turf. How do I deal with this, as setting up two systems has a prohibitive cost?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would argue with that.
Yeah, me
Um,
too.
yeah, a lot of our shrubs are actually pretty drought tolerant. As long as we have consistent moisture in the soil. The difference between turf and a lot of our evergreen shrubs is rooting depth. So our turf grass tends to have a fairly shallow root system because we are constantly cutting the top of the plant off. Its root system tends to be very shallow as well. And so that is kind of the reason why the moisture needs of turf grass need to be more consistent. But with shrubbery and appropriate annuals and perennials for our area, those roots grow deeper and down into the soil. They grow wider into the soil profile. And so their ability to scavenge for water and nutrients is much better because of that. They can make it through a little bit more up and down as far as moisture availability in the soil than turf grass can. So I would still say, in general, following the same rule of thumb, that 1 inch of water per week through the growing season for turf and for shrubs, annuals and perennials, would be a general guideline. Do one more
And
question?
yeah, and also I may want to add that this is a one-time cost when you're setting up your irrigation system to divide into zones, because turf you water just once a week, or depends. So I think if you look at your water consumption and the cost, you will recover that one-time investment probably.
Yeah.
So the second question is there a time difference between normal water via a sprinkler versus a drip line?
Say it one more time.
Is there a time difference? I don't understand the time difference part of it, but
Uh-huh.
is there a time difference between normal water via a sprinkler versus a drip line? I think they're
Yeah.
asking like how
Yeah.
long should you water
Uh-huh.
if it is,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, okay.
I'll get to that when we get into programming the controllers, etc. But it's just a very good question. Very good question, and I will expand upon that, I promise.
Yes. The other question somebody has is how do you determine 1 inch? Is there an estimated length of time to water? How many times per week?
Okay, I'll get to that as well. I've got some cool show and tell that will help you with that as well.
Okay.
All right, well, let's roll through here. So this is fun, and this was a master gardener of ours. This was back in 2012. If you remember the dreaded summer of 2011, where we basically did not get any measurable rainfall whatsoever during the hot growing season. So this was our work basically for 2012 was to talk about irrigation efficiencies anywhere and everywhere that we could. And so basically this was one of our members, and she had basically gotten a threatening letter from her water purveyor saying that she was a water hog and was using way too much water. And so we worked with her through a licensed irrigator to come up with some significant ways that she can address misuse of water in the landscape. So we went through the system and looked for broken heads, broken lines, broken pipes, leaky valves. Did a little tweaking as far as our emitters. I don't know if that's me. And I keep hearing somebody whispering in the background. I'm sorry. We did a little bit of conversion to drip irrigation from spray heads and flower beds. And did not really change any of the plant material in the landscape. Okay. Good mulches in the beds, and just really addressing waste, water waste. And so this is what we saw here. This was her bill in December of 12, and this is the North Fort Bend Water Authority, and it shows their rates and usage amounts. So these are coded based off of usage. So she was rated at this 34 level. And so not only, are you using a lot of water, but there's a coefficient that they use that bases your fees off of the amount of water that you use. And the fact that, we didn't change anything inside the house. This was all exterior landscape water use, is that within 1 year, so we made these changes and we came back, and a year later, we were able to move that usage level down to 7. And so not only is just the amount of water going down significantly, it decreased these fees for water, just water and sewer, and just the general administration fees through the water authority. It dropped those way, way, way down. And so we went from, let's see, that up there. We went from $167 down to $62. And so we just did a little kind of quick measurements on that suggests a monthly decrease of about 25,000 gallons of water, and an annual decrease of 300,000 gallons of water that were just put out into the landscape. And this is water that we didn't need to put there. Plants, we made the changes, and actually the aesthetics of the landscape increased. That means that the plants were performing better, grass looked better, and so it improved. And then we ended up saving 300,000 gallons. And the other thing with this is that she noted, it's kind of like a face of shame thing, right? That you get this letter, but after she started talking with her neighbors, most of the people on her block had gotten the same letter. Okay, so that suggests that, countywide or regionally, if we can calculate this amount of water that we're putting in the landscape that doesn't need to be there, is quite significant. So if we're not talking about just the environmental impact of all this water, then we could talk about the homeowner savings. And this one we calculated out to be about $1,100 a year in savings off their water bill. Now, I don't know about you, but $1,100 would be the difference between me going on a family vacation or not, or making a decision to put a down payment on a new vehicle, or maybe I need to go get LASIX that I've been putting off for years. It would be the decision for me to do something good with my life instead of just giving this money to somebody and not having in my bank account. So that's important to me. I would assume that it's important to most people. So this is a very legitimate reason to be thinking about water conservation. All right, we're going to jump right into stuff to look for. Suma, do we have any questions on hold?
No, the same old two questions that you said you will answer later.
Okay, cool. All right, so this one here, repair and audit and maintenance. We need to become familiar with the basic components of the irrigation system. We need to learn how to do a manual station run on our controller. And then for obvious problems, we need to go through the stations and we need to check for broken pipes, broken heads, misaligned heads, clogged heads, plants that may be obstructing the spray, to get the water where it needs to go, and then look at ways of how we can convert our system to become more efficient. So, excuse me. So this is a diagram of all the basic components of our system. So I'm going to start down here at the bottom as we have a gate valve that comes off of our point of connection, which is probably from the house that originally comes from our main water supply from the municipal system out by the street. It's a cutoff valve. And then right in here, we're going to have a backflow preventer, one of these big heavy duty things right here. And this is basically to prevent water from going from our irrigation system to be vacuumed back into the main water supply so that we are not unintentionally drinking water that has been down in the PVC pipes and the irrigation heads in our backyard. So this is a very important part. So we want to make sure that it is working properly and that it's not leaking water. I know a lot of people during Winter Storm Uri, we had a whole lot of broken backflow preventers that basically busted one or more components of the brass assembly there. So I would go, first off is just walk out and review that area and look for dripping water, wet spots, either on the pipe or down on the soil beneath the array there. Is put your hand down in the soil. If it's very soggy and wet right there, more than likely you have a problem that needs to be addressed. Everything past, just FYI, everything past the backflow preventer, a homeowner can repair themselves. But from the backflow preventer forward, back towards the municipal water supply, those repairs need to be done by a licensed irrigator, and particularly one that has the credentials to work on backflow preventers. So we move up further here, and we will see a box that will have an array of solenoid valves. Now, we had a question earlier. This question was about the valves. Where do we find the valves? And sometimes it's a little tricky, but you can see from the diagram here, a lot of times we're going to walk around the landscape and look for either a green rectangular lid. Sometimes there'll be circular lids that may be 12, 8, or 6 inches in diameter. And just pop the tops off of those lids and look down in there, and then you'll see your valves. Sometimes there'll be multiple valves, like in the big rectangular box. Sometimes there'll be 3 or 4 valves that go to different stations, all located in one spot there. I like that a lot personally because it's easy to review and evaluate those valves if they're all in one spot. And so what you would look for when you pull that lid off is down in that hole. If we haven't had a whole lot of rainfall, and there's standing water, or it's very, very swampy down in there, then we might have a problem with one of those valves. And there's a couple things that could go wrong here. One is there's a little pressure release valve that's on here, and what it can do for you is you have to be very careful. Is it can clean the valve, because sometimes you get dirt and debris, and it'll stop the valve, the solenoid, from being able to actually close the valve all the way. And so it might end up being that it allows a little bit of water pressure to be released through there over a long period of time, and it causes just that zone to just continually cycle a little bit of water. And so you're just wasting like small amounts of water every minute of the day. So what you can do on that is is just hold on to this thing, because once you pull this off, water pressure is going to be released out of this, and it'll kick out a lot of that dust. But don't lose the little valve screw head there. If you can, turn off this isolation valve that's down here to the system, and then go to your valve and unscrew this, and then turn that valve back on, the main valve here, and that way you know you've got this little screw in a piece in your hand or in a bag or something. You're going to let that run just for a minute, and it's going to kick out maybe any dirt that has accumulated in there that might stop that valve from closing all the way. Now I say that sounds kind of easy. If somebody gets real technical, you can take this whole top part off here if there's gravel or something inside of there, but for most people, I wouldn't recommend that, because there are several little pieces in there that have to be put back together, right? But these do have a expiration date. So usually about 15 years, these things are going to start malfunctioning. So you might have to be thinking about replacing these solenoid valves so that they're not just continually cycling water into your landscape. And so what would happen with this, if this was not sealing when it's shut, it's going to allow a little bit of water pressure to go into that zone, and that each of those emitters on the sprinklers are just going to be steadily dripping a little bit of water out, and they never really turn off all the way. And so you end up with wet spots out in the lawn around where each of those heads are, and that's just a lot of water. It's just continually going out. So check these. If you don't see water puddling or standing inside the valve box, then you're probably in good shape. Just for reference, this is right here. This is the actual electronic solenoid. So what these wires do from here, they go to your controller, and this sends a pulse, electronic pulse, into the solenoid that either turns it off or turns it on. But you can use this for a manual control. If you look on the side here, it says on and off, different directions. So if you turn this manually, it will engage the valve, turn it on, and then the same thing is go righty-tighty to turn that snug and turn that back off. So you can test the zone manually if you want to. Just go out there and turn this, and then that station is going to come on, and then you can sneak back in there and then wrench this down to turn it off if you wanted to. So this should answer the question about valve locations.
So there is a corresponding question, Boone.
Mm-hmm.
So what if the valve is covered with grass and you can't locate it visibly?
Yeah, landscape irrigators use a tool, which is a little metal rod with a handle. And that's basically what they use in those situations is they go around kind of the typical areas where that box might be. And it's about a 3/8 inch metal rod that will stab kind of down into the soil, and you'll hear the thud. It's like a hitting hard plastic. You'll hear the sound that will cue you into the location. Then you just have to dig that out. Short of buying that, probably a 3/8 inch diameter rod of metal rebar. If you got something like that laying around, something that you can easily kind of penetrate the surface soil to get to the point where maybe those lids might be buried just a little bit. A lot of times on the side of the house is where you'll find those, one side or the other. Typically, they're not going to be out in the middle of the yard. They're going to be kind of the entrance or access location into different sections of the landscape, just to kind of give you a pointer. So like with this one here, this box is kind of right here in the corner behind the house. It's not going to be out here in the middle of the yard. So usually kind of the walking area of the landscape from front yard to backyard is where you will tend to find those boxes. So here's the big rectangular box, and here's an example of the 6-inch round lid box here that's covering our main cutoff valve. So that's to that component, and then you see our wires going back here up to our controller. We'll have lots of different types of controllers here. This one here is just an open-faced controller. So it's got a very simple control module on this one here. Very simple. It's just finding out where this is. Sometimes they're in the pantry. Most of the time you'll find them in the garage or utility room of the house. Or if they're waterproof, like an exterior box that has a cover, they might be out on the side of the house or side of the garage on the outside, if it's rated for outdoor install. And on these ones here, we just pop, you just have to pop the lid open, and you see our control options all inside of this. One thing, especially with the newer systems, they may be going to a smart controller, where it's a much smaller module, and a lot of times there's either a computer, a PC, or a cell phone app that will help you modify the control times from a distance, or that the irrigation system will adjust on its own based off of weather station data. That's pretty high level stuff, but for techie people, you can actually maximize your efficiencies because the controller will automatically adjust to rainfall, humidity, wind, temperature, day length, etc., without you having to even think about it. So if you trust technology, it works pretty good. If you don't, it might not be the thing for you. So from here, we're going to go down to our PVC array and to our emitters. We've got on this side here a rotor head sprayer, and over here we have some pop-up spray heads. Right over here, what this is showing coming up the side of a fence is a rain freeze sensor. Actually, I think this is saying our transmitter, but that's not what it is on there. That's actually one of these. This is a rain freeze sensor. And so if you have a modern system that has been installed on your home, these are mandatory by TCEQ that you have to have one. And it basically is just there's a little wafer, cardboard wafer inside of this that when it rains or if it's very damp and humid outside, the wafer expands, sends a signal back to your controller to cut off the irrigation. It will not turn on until the next scheduled program in the controller, until this decides not to override the ability for it to turn on. So it's a cool tool, but make sure with that, it's important that rain freeze sensor is installed in a spot where it is directly beneath the gods, right? So you have to have rain that's falling down on it. It needs to be away from the house because we're not trying to get rain that's going sideways underneath the soffit of a roof, which we've seen in a lot of cases. Underneath the gutter, we've seen in those cases. It needs to be where the rain is actually falling directly on it and away from the house, because sometimes the proximity to the home or the gutter can impact the level of humidity on there that might trigger it at the wrong time. Again, on this, I think a question was, how do we know if it's working right or not? The little module that's in here, this little wafer piece, really needs to be replaced about every 5 years. And if I pull that out, we'll see there's these little cardboard wafers on here. If you see that, and they get moldy and dry rotted and they wear out. And so probably every 5 years, you would want to go to irrigation supply, or if you've got an irrigator that works with you, have them, all they need to do to service this is to replace this wafer assembly in here. That can be popped out and the wafers can be replaced, and then you just snap that back on and you should be good to go. How do we know if it's beyond that? If you've done that and it's still not functioning properly, it may just be a malfunction piece, and that would be that if it's raining outside and your irrigation system is going off, you know you obviously have a problem that needs to be looked at. But it's generally a foolproof piece, very simple technology, but that you know, there's obviously exceptions to that rule, and there may be a problem with it that it just needs to be replaced. And fortunately, they're pretty inexpensive to just buy a replacement and then put that back in a suitable location and hook the wires up to it and go back. You're back in business. So this is all kind of the main stuff. This doesn't take into account drip irrigation system or micro sprayers or anything like that. This is just your standard system. So usually in turf grass, you've got these rotor heads, and that is it's got a gear drive in there. And so that head slowly, the gear drive makes it go whatever direction it's set radially, and it tends to cover a long distance. This shoots water out and maybe up to 40 feet. So these are pretty good choice for turf because we don't need as many, and they can throw water across a large area. When we get into flower beds and shrubs and stuff, a lot of times we just see these pop up heads, and it just, whenever the system pressurizes, this thing comes out of the ground and sprays to the fan pattern that you have the emitter set to, and then when we lose pressure, that goes back down. Tends to always be a lot of problems with these, and so I'll kind of talk about those one by one. These are all your basic components that you need to find. You need to find the controller, you need to find your rain freeze sensor, your main gate valve, your backflow preventer, your valve arrays, and your heads. And so what you would do on your controller is go to a manual run station setting, and you can set that for however long it takes you to get on foot from one zone to the other. I'd tend to say anywhere between 2 to 5 minutes. And take some marker flags with you. The little metal flags with the either neon pink or orange or yellow. And as you do a zone, it's going to come on for a couple minutes, and you're going to run out there and you're going to put a flag next to those heads to note their locations and go through all of those. And as they're running, you'll look to see if there's any problems with that are pretty obvious within that, and note that either on the flag or in your notes to address, because a lot of times is once these heads go back down, we either have mulch or grass growing over the tops of these, and without a flag there, you're not going to be able to find it, or you're going to have a really hard time finding it. Okay. So, as I mentioned, first thing, we'll look for that backflow. See, this is heavy brass, and we had some freeze damage on this one that just cracked the whole side of it. It just too much pressure from frozen water in there. This one, our top mushroom on here, cracked, and we'll probably have some issues with this. The one thing to be thinking about when we're looking at these, or at least for you to note, is that the way this works is when our system pressurizes, we have water that goes one way, and it creates a pressure within the system, water pressure. And when we turn that valve off, it creates a very temporary back pressure. It goes in the line. So there's water in the PVC pipes and the valves and the system that has pressure that's now kind of pushing its way back to this. And so what this does is the assembly in here, it has a diaphragm that does not allow that water to go back into the main water supply. That pressure comes out here temporarily, so you'll tend to see a little water at the end of a run time. When that valve turns off, water will spit down the sides of this. It'll bubble down this mushroom over that assembly. So if you see that very temporarily, and this is wet after your run time, then that's not a problem. That's normal business. But if this is always wet, if your system has not been on or recently, and we haven't had rainfall, and this is wet, then you have a problem. Heads. There's always little problems with these pop-up heads, because sometimes what happens is they stay in the up position. We either have some dirt in the line, or we have a little bit of extra water pressure in there. It keeps this up, and then we have the lawn crew shows up, and they don't see these things, and they hit them with mowers. We're playing around out there playing football, and run over them and trip and bend them. So a whole lot of reasons why these things are going to be messed up. And so by us doing this short manual runtime, we're able to see these problems. They'll be evident right here. There'll be a lot of water that'll just be coming up, bubbling up from the sidewalk when this happens. When we see this one right here, this head's probably broken, so we'll see some water spraying out from the emitter, the head body, and then over here this will be bubbling out very very awkwardly. So just like I said, make sure we flag these, and we can come back and address the issues by digging these up and replacing these heads. In this case, the whole head assembly would need to be removed and replaced. And this would be kind of what you would see here. This whole, the top part of the spray body has came off. This top piece here has cracked and probably just separated. This whole piece flew out, so now all we have is that, and that's what's causing this right here. Water just to shoot up. And a lot of times with these are kind of funny, because you might have your system set to go off at 4:30 or 5 in the morning, and you're not seeing this. So that there might be a problem that's been happening for a while. So that's why, going through and doing this manual run check, I'd be surprised if you didn't see something, at least one of these like this somewhere in your system. that need to be addressed. And this is pretty easy. We turn that off, dig this out, and then replace this spray body. This one here, just kind of for reference when we're running those, if we see that kind of a foggy spray or really small water particles coming out of it, it's just a clue that our system is running off of too much pressure. And most of our municipal supplies are going to be in a pretty standard PSI, but if you just happen to be in one that doesn't monitor and adjust municipal PSI, it could be too much pressure for your heads. And so what you may end up having to do in this situation is install way up towards the front of the system a pressure regulator, inline pressure regulator to bring the pressure. This right here is probably like 70 or 80 PSI. That's way too much for these heads. You would want to put a pressure regulator that's going to bring that down to about 40 pounds, 35 to 40 pounds of pressure to eliminate this problem. Because see, this water is not reaching the soil here at all. It's just kind of landing on the plants. It's floating over to the neighbors and evaporating. And so we're not getting any benefit from this water. This one is pretty common. Is our sprinkler has sunk into the grass over time by having mowers driving over it or foot traffic or just settling. His head has gone down beneath the soil level. Grass has grown over it. So when that sprayer tries to come up, it gets lodged in the grass and it's just kind of sprays down there into the grass. And so what we would do to address that is dig that up, and we could install one of these right here. This is an adjustable supply line for our head. Let me see if I can get this right so you see me. So a lot of these big pop-up sprayers, you can either hook the water up from the bottom like this, or you can unscrew this, move this here, and you can hook up your water from the side. And so if you got a situation that's like this, it's probably easier to do is change the connection to the side, and then you can raise this up as high as you want it to get it in the spot that you need it at. Also, there's these little funny pipe connectors, and if you see, these are threaded little pieces together, and you buy these in like a 12-inch long piece. And so if this is too low, the way you have it, you can just get a longer one of these, cut it to the length that you want, install it on here, and then just replace this, and that'll give you an extra however many lengths of this you need to add to get that up, bring the head up out of the soil, up even with the grass, so that it's when it's popping up, the grass is not impeding its ability to rise up. So, you know, when we put this in, this tree may have not been nearly as large as it is now. So we might have a little spot back on the back here that are that's a little dry. So what we would need to do with this head here is kind of two things. One, we could do this option, or there's another version of this. It's just called a swing arm or a swing valve, and it can move around. And so we can take this head and we can move it over a couple feet to one side. That may help increase the water throw to get past this tree. So this other head over here can spray the difference, and we'll avoid a dead spot there where the water's not getting to the grass. Or probably a little bit more drastic of approach, but doable, would be to basically come off of one of these other heads here, put a T on the main PVC line and run back over behind this tree and go ahead and install another rotor head facing the other direction, coming back towards the tree to try to offset that water demand in that spot. So a couple options here that don't take a whole lot of work to do. Again, the simplest is just to move this, dig this up, dig this out, use this adjustable connector to get over to from the main line, the main PVC line, to hook it up and go, get you over 2 feet, and then bury that and put that there. That would work. Do we have any questions?
No.
Okay, cool. All right, so
Yeah.
how much water do we need to put? This is during the growing season. Again, so, we see a lot of irrigation systems starting to fire back up around March 1st, and that's way too early because the southern warm season turfgrass species that we tend to have here, which is mostly San Augustine, and we do have some Bermuda grass, it's not really coming out of dormancy until the first week of April. And saying that, it may look green, but it doesn't have roots on it. These grasses go dormant, and in the process of dormancy, they slough off the majority of their root system. So they're just kind of sitting there. And so if you're applying water and fertilizer to those grasses before April 1st, it's not helping the grass. The fertilizer is not helping the grass. More than likely, all you're doing is fertilizing and watering winter weeds, full season weeds. And so you're creating more weed pressure that you have to deal with. So we say, typically it's going to vary a little bit, but April 1st to April 15th, depending on how quick we're warming up in spring. And then we go all the way around to about November 1st, the latter part of October. That's what we call our growing season here. And that's when your turf grass needs water. Rest of the year, we're wanting it to go dormant, and so it's not really using much water. So when we're considering that time frame, we would say that Bermuda grass needs about 1 inch a week water. Zoysia, which we don't see much here, 1 inch, and then this is, people will argue this, but 1 to 2 inches of water a week for St. Augustine grass to keep it, 2 inches to keep it very green and lush. You go down to 1 inch, it's going to stay green, but it's not going to be super vigorous. You go below that, it's going to be ups and downs as far as it showing drought stress and being thin in certain areas. And as the more you decrease from there, you start to see some dead spots in the yard and etc. So, anywhere between 1 inch to 2 inches would be a good measure. Now this is combined moisture. And so sometimes this is kind of difficult for us to calculate. So I would recommend that you get a rain gauge. Just go down to the hardware store and buy you a cheap little rain gauge. And again, you put it out where the rain can fall down into it without trees, fences, or structures impeding the natural fall of water. Just so you can kind of keep check of how much water. We had a big thunderstorm last night. You may have gotten 1/4 inch or you may have gotten 3 inches, but without some type of a rain gauge, you just won't know. So that'd be the first thing that I would recommend, is that you get you a outdoor rain gauge and use it. After it rains, pour it out, keep it clean, and have it set up and ready so that you can measure the amount of rainfall that we get. Applied irrigation, the question earlier is, how do I know how much I'm applying? There's ways to do that, and I'm not going to go there yet. If you go to irrigation supply businesses, these are called catch cans, and these are what irrigators use to audit application rates of water. And this is a little graduated cylinder here, so it basically shortens the amount of time that you have to run a station to get an inch equivalent when you do it. So what you would do hypothetically is we put several of these out in different locations of the yard, and we go to our controller and we do manual station run. So however, you got it set for 15 minutes on your controller, you're going to let it go through all the stations and put these catch cans out there. And so if you have your system run for 15 minutes, at the end of that, you're going to come out here and you're going to check this measurement and see how much water was applied through that runtime. Very simple. So you can buy a set of these. I think there's 6 or 8 of them for about $20. Or if you eat tuna fish or if you have cats and stuff, you can just use a little can like this and set these out. Try to get it as level as you can. And then once your station has finished its completed its station run, is just go out here with a ruler and just measure the depth of water, and that's going to tell you how much in inches that you apply per run. So if I have this running for 15 minutes and there's half an inch in here, and I have my irrigation system that's going off 4 times a week, then I'm putting out 4 inches of water. I'm sorry, 2 inches of water. I'm doing Aggie math. 2 inches of water, which automatically is maybe too much for our landscape, and that's not considering referencing natural rainfall. So if I did this, if I knew this was going to give me 2 inches of water, but I've put my rain gauge out there and I just had half an inch of rain, well then now I need to either cut back or just cut off the irrigation system until I can balance out the amount of natural rainfall and the amount of water that I'm putting on with my station run times. We had a question about run times on spray heads versus drip irrigation system. So these spray heads, so this is the little nozzle for my pop-up sprayer. It's measured in inches per minute. Okay. Or gallons per minute. I'm sorry. This is measured in gallons per minute is how they measure this. With drip line, that's measured in gallons per hour. Okay. So if you see where I'm going with this, these spray heads, rotors and spray heads, they deliver a significantly larger volume of water in a shorter period of time than your drip line does. So a lot of times, your spray zones may be set for 15 minutes versus a flower bed or a ground cover bed that has drip may be running for an hour to try to apply the appropriate amount of water. And what you can do with the drip line, if you've got the 1/2 inch rigid drip with the emitters built into it, is just raise that up and then put your little catch can underneath there and run that for the duration of that run time. To set your drip line up here with the emitter facing down so it drips into this, and then within the hour or 45 minutes or whatever, you'll be able to measure how much water it's applying, and that should be fairly equivalent to the spread of water, because those emitters are usually 12 inches apart. So it would give you a pretty good idea of how much moisture we're applying to that area. So hopefully that answers the question on runtime. So run times for spray or rotors tends to be 10-15 minutes, and for drip irrigation systems or stations, about an hour on average. Okay, so this one here is what I alluded to earlier. If you have a heavy soil, heavy clay soils for us, probably don't have a whole lot of slopes, not a whole lot of topography, in Fort Bend County. But if you got an area of the yard tends to slope down towards the street, doing a soak and cycle irrigation practice is a very good idea, particularly on lawn areas where we tend to have problems with absorption and runoff. So it's basically what we do with this is either manually on older controllers, we're going to set a program to go through all of our stations to run for maybe 10 minutes. And then right after that, we're going to have program B that's going to run for another 10 minutes. And then go through all those, or 5 minutes. And then depending on our ability for that water to start penetrating the soil, if it starts running off, then we want to shorten those first two and add a third. So you'd have program C that would maybe be an additional 5 minutes. So it's basically what we're doing is we're watering a little bit in a zone, allowing that water to start penetrate through the soil, and then it goes to the next one. And as this penetrates, it kind of keeps getting deeper. So by the time it goes through all of your stations in that program and comes back to the first one, we're applying a little bit more water. And so now that water is able to go even further down into the soil profile. So by doing that 2 or 3 times, we're allowing slow percolation of the water to get down to the root zone instead of it just leaching off the surface and going down into the street. So it's a very good practice. So like I mentioned, on these old controllers, unfortunately, you have to do a little bit of that work yourself of designing those programs. And like there are video tutorials. If you go to YouTube and just put in soak and cycle on X controller, Rainbird, Hunter, with the model number, more than likely there's going to be a video on there, whether it's from a homeowner or an irrigation installer or the manufacturer, that'll show you how to do that based off of your particular model. And so there's that, and there's also some publication tutorials if you're more of a reader than a watcher. But very easy, just takes a little bit of time and patience to understand. Now, newer controllers, a lot of times when you open up that box, there'll be an efficiency setting or a cycle and soak and cycle option, and all you have to do is press the button, and it does all the dirty work for you, and it takes the amount of runtime. So if I had that station set to run for 15 minutes, based off of the amount of water that I'm applying, it'll break that up accordingly and go through those multiple programs, so you don't have to do all the work yourself. So you're lucky if you have that, but if not, you got to do a little bit of the homework yourself. And then obviously the best part is the smart controllers. It has a whole lot of these types of efficiencies built into the water application, and not just soak and cycle, but also to do a seasonal adjustment based off of day length and temperature. And then it connects to a weather station. So if we have a cloudy week, like last week was so hot, I felt like I was melting around here. But this week is kind of cool. So even without rainfall, cooler, cloudier temperatures, it's going to adjust based off of that, and it's going to lower the amount of water applied because the plants just don't need as much when it's cloudy or it's cooler outside. I saw a question there 1 second on run times. You have a question, Suma?
So the question is, I think you answered the question about the run times, but how, somebody is asking, Marianne is asking, just running the stations once every other day under 10 minutes is not good enough this summer?
No, we don't recommend that, because if you think about it, just theoretically, you're watering very frequently. And so but not that much volume. And so what we do with that is we create moisture towards the surface. It stays very moist there. And so our root zone tends to be pretty shallow. It tends to be in that top 2 or 3 inches of soil. And so when we get into very hot weather, where it's very hot and the moisture needs have increased based off of evaporation loss, the plant just doesn't have enough roots down deep in the soil to be able to mine for moisture that's down in the subsoil. So that's why we would say, probably more infrequently than that. I tend to recommend for most people around here to start at every 4 days. That's a good. I mean, some of our water specialists would say once a week is sufficient, but I'm more of a realist, and so I'm going to meet in the middle, and we're going to say every 4 days is a good start for somebody that's been watering every day or every other day. But you'll run that a little bit more in length to try to get that water down deeper into the soil profile so that we have more of a moisture bank to get us to that next run time so that the grass doesn't run out of water. And so what that's also doing is it encouraging, if that surface starts getting dry, that's okay because it's allowing the oxygen down in the root system. But what it's also doing, that grass wants moisture, so it's sending roots down deeper into the soil. It's able to go down deeper and mine for more water and nutrients. And so that's going to end up with a plant that's much stronger, much more resilient to drought stress. So I'm encouraging you to go to try to move that up to every 4 days. But you might need to water just a little bit more when you're doing your run time.
So for flower beds, running every 4 days for, let's say, 15-20 minutes at a time.
It's measuring the application. So we were going to say about 1 inch a week in those areas. So however you want to measure that, whether it's a catch can or a tuna can or whatever, is to figure out how much water we're putting out. We want to try to get that somewhere around 1 inch a week. But also we're depending on the use of organic matter through composts and other organic amendments in those flower beds to sponge up moisture so that the plants have a bank of moisture in the soil longer in between waterings. And we're depending on a good thick layer of wood mulch on the surface that is holding that moisture in place, and it's stopping what I call the roller coaster of moisture. So if we don't have mulch on our flower bed during the summer, the temperature is getting very, very hot and it's drying out. And then at night it's cooling off and then it's going like this. We don't want that. Plants really don't want that. They want this flat line approach. They want good, even soil moisture and temperature. And so by putting a good thick layer of 3 or 4 inches of wood mulch on top of the soil in there, we're not getting that roller coaster nearly as much. So yeah, and I might even say in a flower bed, if you've got adaptable or native and drought tolerant annuals and perennials in those beds, you probably could go with a lot less water than that as well. And Suma, you're a pro when it comes to Texas superstars and the amount of water. We've got a series of plants that have been tested statewide with almost no irrigation at all that
Yes.
perform very well for us. So it's knowing the plant material, knowing what its water needs are, and then just adjust the irrigation based off of those plants.
Okay. So there's a question: how good is the rain sensor sprinkler system and the extra cost? Is it worth to spend the extra cost on the rain sensor sprinkler system?
You mean the smart controller?
He's talking about rain sensor.
Okay, so there's a couple of things just for clarity. This right here is called a rain freeze sensor. And if you don't have one on your system, let me pull this out. If you don't have one on your system and you have a controller from one of the major manufacturers, when I open this up, down here in the yellow, you see the yellow jumper on there? That's for the rain sensor. So if you don't have one, you can go buy one for about $40 from the irrigation supply company and run the wires. There's 2 wires on here, and you just run them into your controller and hook them up on here, and you're good to go. So that's how easy that is to install that onto your existing system. But if we're talking about a smart controller that adjusts to rainfall through a weather station and a data connection, those are much more expensive. But again, for people who are comfortable and confident with adopting new technology, it might be the way to go because they're very efficient, and you don't have to do all the math of the seasonal adjustments and the reprogramming your controller when we're getting rainfall, etc. It does all that for you based off of the weather stations, and a lot of them actually will give you, if you got it set to your smartphone with the app, it'll send you a little reminder or notification if something's not going right with the system. So that's up to the user. Personally, it may be a little overkill for me, but I know a lot of people that use them and they're happy with them. All right. Let's see here. What's next here? Oh, drip. Good, good, good. All right, so we mentioned drips irrigation earlier. When I talk about drip, it's this right here. This is what we call rigid inline drip. It's a 1/2-inch tube that has micro emitters built into the line, typically at every 12 inches. And you just grid this spaced out evenly through a flower bed, shrub bed, and anchor it down and cover it with mulch. And it works very well. We tend to say that like your spray heads and rotors are usually about 75% water efficient. So we're losing some water with those. With the drip irrigation, we're about 90% efficiency. So the vast majority of that water is being used by the plants effectively. So a great option for flower beds and shrub beds. There is some research that's being done on translating this into a turf grass irrigation system, but unfortunately there's some kinks there that make that maybe not work as well in a turf situation. So they're still working out the kinks, you might say, on drip for turf grass. But for shrubs, ground covers, annual perennial beds, this is the way to go, and pretty easy to maintain. Again, you'll need to increase the runtime on your drip zones significantly because we're applying this in gallons per hour instead of gallons per minute. So as I mentioned here with these new technologies, I got a blown up picture here with this installed above and outside of the gutter. I've seen them, I'm not lying to you. I've seen them underneath the soffit, underneath this gutter installed, and it's not going to do anything. So pretty simple, easy to install. You can do this yourself and just run the wires over to your controller. This right here is a soil moisture probe, kind of the same thing as we bury this little probe into the soil, and it measures the amount of moisture that's available in the soil. And if this gets to a point where the soil is completely saturated or boggy, it sends a signal back to your controller to turn it off and not allow those run times to begin. And again, here this smart controller will adjust based off of weather station data and this ET, not extraterrestrial, but evapotranspiration. This is a combination of plant loss of moisture through transpiration and evaporation. So it's just evaporating off of the plants and the soil, and it's being released through the plant cells. This is what we call ET. And so the smart controller will adjust. So if we have a cloudy, cool day, the ET is much lower than it would be on a hot, sunny, windy day. So it'll do the adjustments for you. So pretty cool technology. I would invite you to look into it. All right, so that's kind of the nutshell here. We've got some time left here to answer some questions, but all very simple, is using a lot less water. And by doing that, there's a pretty good chance that we're actually going to improve the results, the aesthetics, and the health of our plant material. We're going to lower our water bills and save money so I can go on my vacation this summer, and we can feel good that we are being a steward to our local environment and that we are not water hogs wasting water in the home landscape. So hopefully you will benefit from some of these practices, and then you can address all four of these and become a big winner. Get a big winner chicken dinner. All right.
So we have a couple of questions.
Yes.
What do you think about battery-controlled rain sensor?
You mean controller? Probably is a battery powered controller. Um, for small areas, like if I have a little seasonal vegetable garden and I want to use a battery powered controller to monitor the valve in the irrigation, sure, that works really good on a short-term basis for just watering. If you maybe planted a couple trees and those trees maybe need a little extra water, is just hooking up a battery powered controller to your water spigot and feeding the water needs of those particular plants. Herb gardens, vegetable gardens, container gardens, etc. That's a really good idea, but for a home system like this, um, I tend not to recommend that. Um, I would use a auxiliary power source. Usually you plug these into a 110 volt power supply from the house. But some of them do have, they do have a spot. And this one doesn't. Some of them have a spot where you can add some batteries in case of power outages, so that you don't lose your programmings that are saved in the system. But for a modern home irrigation system, I would recommend one of the modern controllers at minimum. And this would be either a Toro, a Rainbird, Hunter, etc. And I say that because those big companies, they do fantastic work with educating their clientele. So there's a lot of online resources. So again, if you just typed in your make and model of your controller, uh, the manufacturer is probably going to have a whole lot of cool videos that's going to help you understand how to use it effectively. So that would be my advice.
So someone is asking, can you use a soil moisture probe without a smart controller?
Yeah, it's not, you would basically, it has two wires, just like the rain freeze sensor. And so that would go right into the feed on your controller that says rain sensor on here. You'd do the soil probe wires would feed into this location on there, and it would work just the same. Basically, all it does is sends a signal to the controller to to shut off the program temporarily. So yeah, you don't need a smart controller. This big guy here. Oh goodness, this big guy here, the external one. If I sneak inside of here and look way up in this corner, it just says sensor. There's two little legs in there, and that's where you would plug in either a soil moisture sensor or your rain freeze sensor into that spot. And these are not smart controller. These are manually operated controllers. This is just one that is rated for external use.
So I just asked Premji to unmute himself or herself and ask the question, because I'm not understanding the question. They're repeating about battery operated rain sensor.
Okay.
So I do have a battery operated rain sensor that has a transmitter and receiver. I'm not sure how to test it out, whether it works or doesn't, really. By creating sort of a rain, I don't know. And I would like to know your opinion about this battery operated rain sensor.
So it's battery powered and Bluetooth activated, like it's wireless.
No, there is a wire that comes out from the main controller and is connected to the wireless transmitter, and that communicates with the other component outside that actually is affected by rain. So those two, transmitter and receiver, talk to each other, but I don't know whether they do or not, because I don't know how to test it.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I would have, I have to see the specs on the actual product to give, a very honest and non-biased answer. But just off of the hip, personally, I would not go that route, because there's issues with connectivity between the devices, and the fact that batteries just don't last that long. And so, I don't want to have to keep up with making sure I have charged batteries in that component multiple times throughout the year and remembering to replace those. So personally, I know that I'm very forgetful as a person, and miserly and lazy. So I would rather have it hardwired into the controller.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Yes, and that's just my personal opinion based off of the technology. You could probably do a little bit of consumer report study on the effectiveness of the product that might suggest that it's a perfectly good tool.
Hey, Boone, this is Nancy. Could I just interject?
Yes.
I think a battery-operated rain sensor would not use much battery power, so you wouldn't have to be changing it. It's only when it's sending the signal that it's going to use battery power. So it should work fine. And how you would test it is set your irrigation controller to go off during the next rainstorm. Would be the easiest way. Otherwise, you could go up there and sprinkle some water on it to test it and see if it shuts off your controller. But I think the easiest thing is, we're going to have rain in the next few days. Set your controller to a day where we expect rain all day and see if it shuts it off.
Yeah, and even further than that is more than likely. So if we have a rain event, a significant rain event that's going to trigger that sensor device, it's probably going to override your controller for maybe 3 days after that, assuming that assuming that you had adequate rainfall. So even if you just had a pre-scheduled runtime that happened the day or the next day after that, is just make note of it and see if that comes on or not on its own. Would be a little bit more of the the lazy evaluator but it would work as well. Well, looks like we have we've gone over our time, but I don't have anything else going on. I'll entertain some more questions if we've got them.
I don't see any questions in the chat, but if people have questions, you can unmute yourself and ask.
We'll wait on that. One thing I didn't mention, and I should have. So in these pop-up risers, you have what's called the emitter. So this is just like our spray body here, and it's got all spring-loaded lift on here. But the only thing that's actually called the emitter is this little piece on the end right here. And so it would be, if you see a head that's squirting water and it's not really doing what it's supposed to as far as throwing water across the area, more than likely your filter in here is just clogged up with debris. And so you can either wash this out or maybe dip this in vinegar overnight and then sit it back in here. That should improve it. If it doesn't, you can go to the irrigation supply houses and you can buy replacement filters that are designed to drop back down in there and then hook your emitter head back onto the top. So that's one thing that's pretty common for people, is these things just get clogged up and aren't spraying right. Pretty easy fix. All right, any other questions? All right, cool. Well, I'm good to go. Hopefully we answered everybody's questions and they're ready to go out and evaluate their irrigation systems.
I know I am. I think I've been using up a lot of water. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. Unless anyone else has a question. But if you want more programs like this, we will be continuing the Landscape Success Series on July 20th with the workshop Successful Home Composting with Ed Plant and Amanda Banda. Is that still correct? Okay. Registration for this class is now open, actually. And you can find more programs available at www.fortbend.lib.tx.us. In any case, thank you everyone for coming. I will stop recording. And